Hi, I'm speaking to you from Victoria, BC, as a settler on the traditional territory of the Lekwungen peoples, the Songhees and the Esquimalt nations. I'm Ro. I'm the founder and I help run the Canada Comics Open Library, or CCOL, which is a volunteer-run community comics library and nonprofit arts organization. Is a part of the project towards CCOL's goals. I also created a database to highlight Canadian creators. For this presentation, I'm going to be speaking about my experience of creating the database, including researching creators and small press for the database as well. So bear with me for a minute here as I figure out screen sharing. There we go. Just gonna change the view here to present. The database includes everyone who has lived and created within Canada and has an experience of spending time here or being born here, even if they eventually moved elsewhere. I also wanted to make sure to note on the database page that not everyone who lives or works within the boundary of the land many people call Canada necessarily identifies as being Canadian. In 2019, I attended a really great TCAF talk called Critical History of Canadian Alternative Comics. In this talk, critic, curator, and editor Kim Juha highlighted creators that were traditionally left out of comics history, with a focus on the 1990s. This talk included conversation about the potential inequities of Canadian Spaces awards and honors that have a strict nationalistic definition of who can qualify to be a Canadian creator. And I think that conversation is really important. What funding structures and opportunities are individuals or groups left out of if they or their work don't fit a certain nationalistic prerequisites of identity? How do we navigate working within the parameters of these words that hold so much power to alienate, harm, and exclude people who do not or cannot choose them to define their identity or work? Many people want these works and creators included, but avenues to these works are more difficult, and inherited historical and national standards that have purposely worked against comics accessibility and marginalized creators are difficult to overcome, things that are so deeply rooted. This is something I've been thinking about throughout my experience with CCOL and when I worked in bookstores and libraries for a little while. And I'm sure that there will be conversations surrounding these issues throughout this symposium, and there are many great initiatives out there to counter some of these barriers. Through my work, I want to acknowledge colonialism in Canada, and Canada itself is an unnatural reality that, while it is a symbol of hope and a safe place to many people, it has also harmed, murdered, and devastated generations of human lives. I think community building, organizing, and resource sharing is a powerful response to systemic inequities on a personal level. For that reason, I wanted to include collectives and collaborative projects in the database who host events, create publications, share resources, and offer an example of what other creators can also build within their own communities, no matter how small or remote. I also compiled an expanded list on CCOL's website resources page. In the past couple of years, I've seen Canadian creators supporting each other across long distances or across cities throughout this period of isolation and forced hyper-reliance on the internet, apps, and other online platforms. Online communities and projects have formed, and despite its corporatized, invasive, and even insidious nature, Instagram has been one way for creators to check in with each other and share work and experiences. Although not today, because Facebook has been down all day. I think these spaces are important for people to understand the array of difficult personal experiences within comics, from working in the mainstream industry to creating as an outsider on the peripheries, to the struggles of marginalized creators with less access to the industry and visibility. And this is just speaking on some of the challenges for creators, not to mention other people who work within comics, like publishers or comic shops owners. I know someone will be presenting about online spaces like Instagram at the symposium, which is great. I think Canadian cartoonists and those working within the land called Canada are creating and have created really beautiful and important work, often from the margins. These comics many times do not make it outside of Canada, or in the case of zines and other self-published and small press work, sometimes even outside of a creator's own city or hometown. This can mean readers may never see this material, but I think there are also unique communities of creators and collectives that form through this shared isolation. Each time I visit a zine or a comics fair, I always see a unique approach someone has taken with comics, and that's really exciting to me. For a long time, I wish there were more ways of accessing lesser known comics, and that's part of the reason why I started the database as well. But there are some great spaces out there. When I first moved to Toronto in earlier years, when I visited my brother who lived there, I would browse the Beguiling, which is one of those spaces that has carried indie comics and been a long-term source for unique work and local self-published works. Librarians and bookstores have done a lot to help make comics more accessible, working against a lot of limitations. Organizing comics on a local level, for example, in individual library branches, bringing more comics into collections and cartoonists into the library for programming, and improving how comics metadata is captured. Comic zines and mini comics are now being integrated into some online comic shops as well. And although there aren't many Canadian zine distros specifically for comics, I'm not sure if I can think of any. Many zine distros will also carry comics, and quite a few international zine distros are open to distributing Canadian comics. I created a list of those on CCAL's website resources page, and you can see some on this slide here. I made the database at the same time that I was building CCAL's website and cataloging piles of comics from my living room using OpenBiblio, an open source integrated library system. I hope that the database and CCAL can provide creators the way to connect to other people who are making comics locally that they might not have heard of otherwise, and especially for people who have difficulty approaching other people in person or spaces for a variety of reasons. I also hope it can provide a way for publishers and other people to find and hire lesser known Canadian cartoonists and marginalized creators, that it will help people collaborate on projects based on similar interests and motivations. I spent a long time looking at vendor lists, visiting zine and comics fairs and libraries. I also follow the work of Canadian creators on Instagram, and local comic shops that carry zines have been a great help as well. There are many online resources I use, and I'm showing them here just in case anyone listening might not have heard of them, although I'm sure many people have. These are linked to directly on the library website on the database and website resources page. I just wanted to mention the Queer Cartoonist Database, Cartoonists of Color Database, and the Disabled Cartoonist Database, which I haven't used yet, were created and are maintained by cartoonist Mari Naomi. The Canadian Comics Archive is a pre-internet alternative comics archive, and they're all digitized, which is pretty amazing. It was created by Robin McConnell of Inkstuds. I also went to Canadian comics publishers' websites and made a list for myself, and decided to publish this list as a blog post on CCAL's website blog, just in case it'll be useful to other people. The Joe Shuster Awards used to have aggregated list pages for like comic shops and creators. They might be revamping their website now, I'm not too sure. The Guardians of the North, I used the website version of the archival exhibition that was curated by a Canadian comic scholar and archivist, John Bell. So I also used keywords. The database is searchable by keywords like biographical details, as you can see, role and genre related keywords, and this information is on the database webpage as well. So the database, in creating the database, I wanted to make sure to include people whose work you might only find at a zine fair in a small Canadian town once every few years, as well as more well-known creators, maybe from larger cities. This slide is a list of some comic zines at CCAL, and I think most of these creators are in the database and are local. And I should also mention that I include clickable links to creators' websites, Patreon, social media, and online stores if they share this information publicly. And this is a few more comics at CCAL and creators in the database. It's well known that making comics is often a very solitary process, but even if creators prefer working independently, I think it's good for creators to know they have some community rooting for them, even if it's just couple people or even maybe one other creator. And I hope that the database and CCAL can help people find that. This is just a screenshot of the homepage, and some sub pages that are under the resources heading the top of the homepage. I should mention the websites include everything from resources on how to create comics to comics criticism to other resources for creators, academics, or those new to comics. One of the main goals of CCAL was resource sharing for creators and those interested in learning about comics. I think many people get into comics in a solitary way, often from a young age. And outside of that, you sort of have to find or be introduced to the right comic for you to get interested in them. When people start making comics, I think a really beautiful thing happens and people naturally approach them in different ways, because there are so many possibilities in comics, and like zines, which many creators use to tell stories, there's a lot of freedom to experiment and produce really unique works. I think making a wide range of comics accessible is important, because if all someone finds is work that they don't connect with or that makes them feel bad about themselves, it's going to be more difficult to have a motivation or chance to stumble into the right comic or narrative. And I personally think that if a person finds their right comics, it can make life much more enjoyable and bearable, and that it can also lead to people discovering community and the really powerful feeling of actually creating something, even just scribbles in an 8-page mini zine made from one sheet of paper. With reading comics, I've seen how there's that visceral response, like a meaningful connection where you feel how someone else moves through and observes the world, or at least you imagine that you feel this. And I think that keeps pulling people back to the medium. This slide shows a few more contemporary Canadian comics that have been that for me. And you can probably tell I'm biased towards small press, autobio comics, and experimental comics, because those tend to be the narratives that have meant the most to me. So I think that's it. If you would like a more in-depth look at how CCAL catalogs comics, I presented a paper at the second annual conference of the Comic Studies Society Comics/Politics, and you can read that on CCAL's blog in the July 30th, 2019 entry. It deals with how comics have historically been cataloged and viewed in libraries, and some of the shortcomings of traditional classification like Dewey Decimal and Library of Congress when it comes to comics, as well as the politics of our project. So let me stop this screen share and turn my camera back on. Hello again. So if you want to get in touch with me, if you have any questions or comments or suggestions, you can email me at rotemd, R-O-T-E-M-D @canadacomicsol.org. And yeah, thanks for listening. And I look forward to hearing other presentations and participating in the conversation. Thanks. Bye.